The chair of the Fresno County Democratic Central Committee.
Yay! Thankless.
He is on the Board of Leadership for Jobs and a New Economy and Central Valley Partnership. He's also on the editorial board of Community Alliance newspaper. He's involved in most of the Democratic clubs. Received a Democrat of the Year from Fresno County Democrats in 2017. Has received the Kennedy Club Courage Award. And in 2012, he was named Volunteer of the Year from the California Democratic Party Region 8. He's also received the National Political Caucus Good Guy Award. He's also very kind to me.
Very important.
He answers a lot of my questions, sometimes when they're stupid. He also twists my arm into doing things, so it is mutually beneficial, I think. So please help me give a warm round of applause. And you're going to want to change the three of us.
Yeah, you might want to move away from the screen. Well, good evening. So what I want to talk about tonight is what's going to happen between now and next year. And the first part of it's going to be a little focused on the national, but we do want to get through that quickly because we want to focus on the local stuff, which you might not know as much about. Now, I know the tendency, everybody's going to want to talk about Trump, but we can save that to the Q&A. And so this is kind of more or less the contents. First is Trump, Trump, and Trump. And there's a reason that I've listed this 3 times. The second is what the Democratic presidential nomination process is going to do for the election. Riding the blue wave, can we maintain what happened in 2018? Then this a key point is the electoral changes. The way we vote is going to change radically in Fresno County next year. And then we'll talk about what's on the primary ballot versus what's on the general election ballot. And then the most critical part, which is what we can do to help get Democrats elected. So before we do that, I want to talk about, these are the questions we were asking when we did this same presentation before the 2016 election. Particularly in the unlikely prospect at that time of Trump being elected president. That he could determine the makeup of the Supreme Court, our economic approach for the next generation, how would his being president affect our role in international affairs, and would recent advances be turned back, like the Affordable Care Act, same-sex marriage, and then other things that we weren't even that are much longer in place, like Roe versus Wade. So I think we can safely say the Trump election has threatened all of this. So the first time is Trump on the ballot. In theory, him being on the ballot should be us holding him accountable. This is our first opportunity as an electorate to do that. Now, we can argue whether Congress should have moved forward on the investigations on impeachment. I think they should have, but that's neither here nor there. He's going to be on the ballot, and this is our opportunity to get rid of him. The second is, from historical perspective, he has had minimal successes. In fact, his only legislative success is the tax cut for the 1%. There's really nothing else legislatively. Now, he's done a lot of other smaller things with executive orders, and I think we would argue, certainly from our perspective, none of those have been positive. But when you listen to right-wing radio, they rave about all these executive orders that he's passed. Even though you may remember how they abhorred executive orders under the Clinton or Obama administration. Of course, he has the worst approval ratings ever, which should mean he's unelectable. But we look at how the Electoral College plays into this, and it could be a real problem. In fact, I heard an analysis this morning that they were saying Trump could lose the popular vote by 5 million votes and still eke out an election or win in the Electoral College. So, and then the last thing is, does it matter who the Democratic opponent is? I think a year ago we would have said Trump's awful. It doesn't matter who we run against him, they'll win. I think we're increasingly seeing that that's probably not going to be the case. So in the Democratic part of this, we'll talk about that. Then Trump securing his base. He is actually stronger among Republicans than he was the day he was elected. I think even among Republicans there was some sense that he couldn't be elected, at least among center-right Republicans. But they're all behind him now. The elected officials and the right wing have a cult-like devotion to Trump. It's really inexplicable from anything that I can comprehend. But he's using all the dog whistles that work with the radical right. Particularly the racist issues, the things about the border, all of those kinds of things. It just gets the right up in arms. But what is most troubling is evangelicals and the other Christians who support him. It's just the complete hypocrisy from what they claim to believe, and their religion, their not their religion, but their ideals seem not to matter to them if it's politically expedient to forget them. And then the final one is he going to be held accountable? So we have numerous attacks on democratic institutions, on the Constitution, certainly the Congress, and I would argue the judiciary as well. He's destroying government. And you say, how is he destroying government? By putting essentially industry lobbyists in cabinet positions, putting incompetent people in cabinet positions, refusing to hire people and for a number of positions throughout government. I think it pretty much goes without saying at this point, he's destroying our stature in the world. Obviously, what we saw in the past few days from the British ambassador, I think that's probably the popular opinion among ambassadors and other world leaders. And also destroying traditional areas of cooperation. I mean, even though the left and right have been going at it in Congress for years, there have been areas where you could sit down and talk to each other and there was some level of civility. I think that's been completely abandoned under Trump. And then finally, impeachment. At this point, even if it moves forward, it probably wouldn't play out until after the election. Although certainly if we got into impeachment and the investigations were starting to reveal some of his history, we would hope that would have an impact on the electorate. So from the Democratic presidential survivor, who would be best positioned to beat Trump? This isn't really part of the presentation, and I don't want to get into a lot of this, but it's my personal opinion that Biden is not the person who can beat Trump. So, and I think we have a good crop of candidates who can step up and certainly be very competitive with Trump. And I also like to say one thing. If you remember in 2016, the media narrative on the Democrats at the national level was we didn't have a bench. Well, we've proven them wrong on that. We got a hell of a bench. Then we have our internal party disputes, and you see this playing out a little bit with the presidential candidates, although probably not as much as it did in 2016. But there clearly is, a progressive wing of the party and a more corporatist wing. And then identity politics. And so what I mean by this, you are starting to see some candidates line up behind someone because they're a woman, because they're LGBT, or because they're a certain ethnicity. And that's all fine and good in the primary, but we do have to find a way to work together once we've secured a nominee. And then that gets to my last point. Are we going to be able to coalesce? I think that did not happen to the extent it should have in 2016. And that's a reflection not of either of the candidates in particular. I think probably both could have done more, and certainly the supporters for both could have done more to have coalesced. In terms of riding the blue wave, will we be able to maintain the enthusiasm that we had in 2018 going into 2020? Early indications are that people are still upset, people still want to be engaged. I think we are going to be able to hold on to that enthusiasm. And we've got Trump helping us. Every day he's helping us. Keep
He doesn't even have to open his
enthusiasm.
mouth to do that.
Right.
His tweets.
So obviously the first key is to hold the seats that we won in 2018. So all of those red to blue seats, which we won, most of those that we had targeted throughout the country, now we have to hold them, and particularly those that are in more Republican-oriented districts. We also have to work more aggressively on those seats where we came close last time. We came really close in 22. CD4, which is the McClintock district, that was not quite as close, but we certainly did significantly better than we had any time in previous cycles. And of course, making a play for the Senate. As we've seen, the U.S. House of Representatives cannot accomplish completed legislation on its own. So we desperately need to get the Senate and the Congress. Then even if Trump were to be re-elected, God forbid that should happen, but we would at least be able to pretty much stop it.
I heard that.
Yeah. And then, what are the lessons for the national and state parties from the previous cycle? Well, obviously the lesson at the national party was, the national party should not be getting into the presidential race on behalf of one candidate in the primary. I think that lesson has been learned well. For the state parties, I think what could be learned is what happened in California, is when the state party puts resources in the hands of county parties and regional Democratic Party politics, you get more bang for your buck. So will that model be picked up by other parties throughout the state, throughout the country? I hope so, but no guarantee of that. So this is the real key. How we vote is going to change radically in 2020.
Right.
So we are we have opted to go under the Voters' Choice Act. This is a county by county opt-in. Fresno County opted in. It's a decision made by your Board of Supervisors. And the reason Fresno County opted in was that Buddy Mendez didn't want to pay the additional money in the short term to keep us out of this system. So he didn't want to do this, but it became a money thing for him. So he agreed to do it. And longer term, the Voters' Choice Act will save us money, but short term, there are some initial costs that up the ante quite a bit. But that's just historical. So what does this mean? So first off, everyone will get a vote by mail ballot. And you can return that vote by mail ballot without having to pay postage.
Everyone that's registered will get
Yeah,
it.
right.
Everyone that's registered to vote, yes. So that alone, even if the other stuff wasn't in place, that alone is huge, okay? But there are going to be fewer polling sites.
Right.
Right now we have a few hundred polling sites throughout the county. Now there's going to be as few as 50. But the good news is 10 of those are going to be open for 11 days. And the other 40 will be open for 4 days. Now we have to have at least 50 in Fresno County. The registrar can choose to do more. And she hasn't committed to that yet, so we'll see. But there has been a commitment to have at least one polling site in each of the incorporated cities. So there's 15 of those. Of course, the bulk of the polling sites will be in Fresno and Clovis, but there will be at least one in the other 13 cities. What I'm a little confused about is how they're going to do the 10 that are open for 11 days outside
Yeah.
of Fresno Clovis. But at any rate, so you have a lot more opportunities to vote, and because you've got a larger window, and you can vote at any of these polling sites. You no longer have to go to a precinct-specific polling site. So if you live in Selma but work in Fresno, you can go to a site in Fresno and vote.
But would that still be counted as a provisional ballot?
That would not.
Oh, okay.
This pretty much eliminates provisional ballots because you can also register on site. So, and in addition to the vote centers, they're going to have drop boxes throughout the county. I forget the exact number of those, where you can just drop in your mail ballot if you don't want to mail it in. So you can mail in your ballot, you can drop it off at a drop box. If you're one of those people who just has to vote in person, you can still do that. And if you've dallied around and haven't registered, you can just show up at the polling site and do it. Okay?
See, I don't understand those voting centers. What's that for if everybody's getting a mail?
Because there's still going to be people that want to vote in person, and there's going to be people who haven't yet registered but want to vote.
You mean after they get their ballot in the mail?
Yes. So there obviously is provisions so that people can't vote twice.
So they can register at those voting centers?
Yes. And register and vote at the same time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So in the counties that have done this, provisional ballots went almost to nothing.
Okay.
In fact, I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what would still be a provisional, a reason for a provisional ballot at one of these.
Well,
So,
they lost the
Could
mail.
I
So-
ask you a question
go
also
ahead.
about this? So, remember in 2018, where there was this big push to go and pick up ballots for people and there were ballot parties? Are we thinking that's gonna be still a strategy, one? And if it is, how are we going, is there some kind of badge or something that people can get? Because I'm very concerned that Republicans are gonna go get people's ballots and throw them away.
yes, so
And I don't trust
there
the
will
ballot.
still be
Yeah.
Precinct one.
what's been called ballot harvesting, although I was told that's the Republican term, so I need to learn what the proper term is. But
Organic. Concierge ballot service.
ballot service. So, and what that is that you can collect ballots from voters and collect them and then turn them in. So what Natasha's talking about, and what I think is a real concern, because the Democrats had so much success with this in the last cycle, I think what the Republicans are going to do is they are going to hire young people to collect ballots.
Oh, yeah.
Then when they have collected the ballots, they're going to take them and then they're going to destroy them. They won't, of course, tell the young people that's what they're doing. But so I asked both the registrar and the Secretary of State's office if they have any plan in place to address that. They were not convincing to me that they had a plan. So we are going to have to be vigilant for that and see what we can do.
Perhaps there's some way to identify, like we can, when it gets
Like a
closer.
badge, some kind of a
Yeah.
Yeah,
badge.
so what she's suggesting, I think it's a good idea. We should just, somehow you have to register in order to do that. And that's an excellent
Yeah,
idea.
but that's what, they were
And give
picking
a
them up
receipt
at
to
all
the
the
person.
retirement centers for the
Yeah.
old people that couldn't
I
get
don't
the
know
ballot.
if
And
it's
then they
allowed,
had to have a relative
whoever
or
gets
someone.
the-
We don't have to do that anymore.
If it's allowed to advertise on that as a voter pickup. I don't know, I'm just thinking that there's a way, because this is, I'm assuming that our elections are gonna get national coverage again, and so there'll probably be a nice influx of money. If there's a way, and again, I don't know the legality of this, but if there's a way to use that money to also educate the public, if we were to do like a badge or something along those lines, so that people know that this, is, you know, if someone does not come with, you know, said shirt or whatever, not to give it to them.
A, and B, offer people a receipt for their ballot.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that it has their
Yeah.
ballot number on it, so that they can check online, and if their ballot was never received,
Exactly.
they can call out.
That's an excellent
Oh,
idea.
this could be
Can you
real
forward me a
fraud.
synopsis of that, and I'll run that up the ladder.
Yeah.
Chuck,
Well, I still think that people need
Oh,
to be,
yeah.
there also may need to be a media campaign saying, beware of strangers, don't give your ballot to anybody you don't know.
Yeah.
Instead of like telling a kid, telling a kid, don't accept candy from a stranger.
Yeah.
This is like, don't give your ballot to a stranger.
Oh, wow.
so that goes to my next point, which is longer term, this is going to be great. But short term, it is a huge change.
Yeah.
People don't like change, and it's hard enough to get people to vote anyway.
Right.
So there's going to be a huge educational endeavor required on our part to make sure that voters understand what we are doing. And this is in conjunction with the fact that our primary is going to be in March and not June.
Right.
So the registrar's office is going to community groups, and they're talking specifically about the Voters' Choice Act and how it will change. They have a Voters' Choice Act Advisory Committee. You can see some of the information that's been presented to them online. For example, they already have the maps of proposed polling sites. They're not yet confirmed, but you can kind of see where they are, and you can suggest other possible locations. And they have a nifty little flyer, both in English and Spanish, and soon will be in other languages, that sort of outlines what the changes are. We need to make sure those get in the hands of every voter. So the educational piece here is huge.
So, Michael,
Yes.
do you think we could get a postcard, either convince them to send a postcard to every household, which is what I think they should be doing,
Yeah,
saying these are the changes, be prepared to vote?
They have to, well, I don't know if it goes to every household, but it goes to every registered voter.
Yeah.
And they have to do that. That's part of what they're required to do by state law. And they do have money set aside for that and for other media promotion. And they've already talked with both radio and television about some PSAs. And I believe they had already filmed one. They showed us an example of one.
It's blurred.
So this is the current status of registered voters in Fresno County. 461,000 countywide, 172,000 are Democrats. So 37.5% are Democrat, 32.6% are Republican. But here's the real key to take from this table. Since 2017, the number of Democrats has increased in the county 0.1%. The number of Republicans has declined 3.2%.
Good.
But here's the biggest statistic. No party preference increased
Yeah.
30%.
Wow.
30%. So people are opting not to be,
Yeah.
well, it's understandable
Either
people would
party.
not to be Republican, but more people are opting not to be Democrat or Republican. So this is another factor that we have to deal with in terms of education. Now, part of this is going to be that when people are automatically registered at the DMV, they're registered no party preference because they're not stating a preference. They get a card in the mail asking them to state that. And some people will return that, some people won't.
Michael, but in the primary, will the no party preference people be able to vote for a Democrat or a Republican?
So that depends on whether the parties allow them to do so. And I'm a little unclear on whether the Democrats are doing that or not.
Off control of turnout, what's the word on California allowing Trump on the ballot if he doesn't cough up his tax returns?
Why would that be a requirement?
They just
It
have
is a requirement, isn't it?
Yeah.
Did they
Yes,
just pass that?
state legislation, they just brought that up.
It was already passed?
I believe so. I saw something like a
Okay.
week ago. So I don't know if that's.
I don't know if it's in the
Well,
pipeline,
that's
but
interesting. I'm sure there would be a court challenge, but I hope we can
I
stop
don't know how a
it.
state, I don't know how we hold up the court for a state to block the candidate in a federal election, so.
Well,
That's
look,
right.
look at the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, how they had that problem, and It can work.
I also think it's been such a dangerous precedent.
Yeah.
Now, can the no party preference person go to a voting place and say, I want a Democratic ballot or a Republican ballot?
They can change their registration and do that, but the parties decide whether other groups can do that, and I don't know what the parties have decided.
Because when I was working it, they were able to come in, and one time a lady said, we had her down as a Republican. She said, I did not want Republican, I want a Democratic ballot. And we had to give her a Democratic ballot and do the provisional.
Yeah, and that didn't count. But now she could do that. But when you did it, it wouldn't have been allowable.
No, in the past, the Republicans have consistently not let outsiders vote in the primaries.
Right.
Democrats have always, well,
No, I think we're going to have problems here.
have always let declined state voters
Right.
vote in the Democratic
We're
Party.
going to have problems.
So next this is what's going to be on the ballot in March. And there's really not that much that's going to be on the ballot in March. Of course, there's the presidential primary, the 4 U.S. congressional races that come into our county. So CD4, that's McClintock. 16 is Jim Costa. Jim Costa already has a Republican opponent and 2 Democratic opponents, Kim Williams and Esmeralda Soria. And then in 21, that's T.J. Cox. He currently doesn't have an opponent. It's rumored that both Valadeo and Vidak want to run against him. I'm sure they'll have an agreement where only one does. And then in 22, that's the Nunes seat.
Yeah.
And of course, Dari Resvani, Bobby Leotu, and Phil Arbayo are running as Democrats in that district. Is there any third-party people running?
Not that I know.
Yeah, there was a couple last time.
Why, is it closed now?
No.
And I would be surprised if there's not at least one other person.
Yeah.
It's not gonna close until.
I'm surprised Esmeralda.
Yeah, so actually, the filing period for these races is November 12th to December 6th.
Oh, okay.
So there's still a lot of time for people to get in, although unless they're bringing a lot of resources to the table, it would not be wise for them to do it that way.
Okay.
State Assembly, we have 2 districts in our county. 23 is the Patterson seat.
Is anyone running yet?
We do not yet have a candidate there.
That's terrible.
If we could work on Natasha, she could run in that seat.
I'm
Yeah.
on it. All the skeletons in my closet.
Anybody but Patterson.
31 is Joaquin Arambula. He is seeking re-election, and I think the community really rallied around him after the unfortunate
Domestic.
mess. Yeah. So I think he's going to be in good shape, and there isn't even a Republican that stepped up to challenge him yet. For Board of Supervisors, there will be 3 seats up. 2 is the Brandow seat, 3 is Quintero, and 5 is Magzig. So it's unlikely that Magzig or Quintero will have an opponent.
Yeah.
Brandow might. Someone might think he's a little more vulnerable in a general election than in a special. And then in the city of Fresno, of course, the mayor's race, we've had, of course, Jerry Dyer has stepped forward on the Republican side and convinced the other Republicans to force Lee Brand out of the race. Andrew Jans, Richard Renteria, Elliot Balch, and possibly Luis Chavez on the Democratic side who expressed interest in running.
What about District 5, the president of, I forget his name, he's in my district.
For city council.
Yeah.
So District 5 will not be on the ballot next year.
Or
They alternate.
Caprioli.
Yeah.
Kathy, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah.
He's
So-
starting out, so you're gonna have.
So the even districts will be on the ballot.
Yeah.
2, so we don't know who that is yet because they're going to have the special election in August.
Right.
And depending on how close that is, that will probably determine whether there's a challenger to whoever gets elected next year. 4 is the Capriolio seat. He is terming out. Tyler Maxwell, a young Democrat, is working very hard in that race. And Nathan Alonzo, I believe, is a Republican. He used to work for the Chamber of Commerce.
But Tyler's going to win that one.
Where's 6?
6 is the Bredefeld seat. So I like to say about 6 that 100 years from now, it will still be Republican, but we'll have all the other seats. We would like to see somebody run against Bredefeld.
Yeah.
A Democrat can't win the seat, but it would if we could find a more rational Republican.
Hey, Chuck wants to run for that.
I don't live in that district.
Chuck,
Any prospects for a new district attorney or a new sheriff?
Hey, there you go.
well, good question.
I know that
We've got
attorneys around.
we've got some time to work on that because
Yeah.
those seats don't come up again until 2022.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
But we are certainly looking for prospective candidates. We desperately need a new sheriff, and the district attorney's become increasingly problematic as well.
Yeah.
And then the other thing that
Council's crooked anyways.
the other thing that will be on the
We
ballot,
like to not think that, considering 4 of them are now ours.
Oh, I know that, but I mean, the whole county Fresno's bad.
so the only other thing that will be on the ballot are the Central Committee races. And because you're all Democrats, there will be the Democratic Central Committee on your ballot. The way Central Committee works is we have 22 members. There is a set number in each supervisorial district. For example, District 2 has 6, and then it goes down to as few as 4 in District 4. And it's the same filing period, November 12th to December 6th. There is no cost to file, but you are required to get X number of signatures. I believe it's 20.
20 ballot signatures.
Yeah. And so until the last cycle, we had actually most of the races really didn't go to the ballot because fewer people filed than there were seats available. But in the last cycle, I think all of them went to the ballot.
Yes, I gracefully finished last in District 3.
Okay.
Hey, but at least you ran.
That's right.
In my District 2, where we had 6 seats, but I believe there were about 15 people running. So, but if you do want to get more involved in the party, that's a good thing to look at.
15 people ran for those 6 seats?
Yeah. Yeah. So the other thing that's probably going to start happening here is what we've seen in San Francisco. In San Francisco, and I think in the Los Angeles area, you see people actually treating getting on the Central Committee like a regular campaign, which means they're opening up a campaign account, they're raising money for it. I hope it doesn't get to that here, but we're probably moving in that direction.
People are spending a lot of money in San Francisco.
Right. Now remember, this is it for the primary ballot. Okay? So after the primary, we need unity. We need everybody to come behind whoever the Democrat is that finishes first or second in these primary races. So who's pictured here with the microphone? That's Ricardo Lara, who's our insurance commissioner.
Who will be your speaker?
He'll be the speaker at your fall fundraiser. He is the first out statewide constitutional officer in the state's history. And joining him here is Dr. Asif Mahmood. Dr. Mahmood ran against Ricardo Lara in the primary. And he immediately stepped up and went with him around the state to introduce him and support him.
Wow.
That's what
That's
we need to
unity.
see.
That is
Good for him.
And this picture is actually local. This was in Pat Wilkes'
Oh,
backyard
yeah, that's
at
a stage.
Central Valley Progressive PAC.
Yeah. Yeah.
So in the general election, we're going to have many, many more races on the general election ballot. The good news is because the primary is earlier, we're going to have a wider period of time for these folks running in November to develop their campaigns. And some of the electorate won't like that because it also means it's more time for them to be hammered
Yeah.
by people wanting to vote. But from a political perspective, I think it's a good thing. So the State College Community College District, I believe there's 3 seats that are going to be on the ballot. Leal, Caglia, and it's not Con, Ikeda. And Debbie Ikeda has indicated she's not seeking re-election on the Eric Payne seat, so there's 4 of them. So there's a couple of those seats that I think we can win. We did very well in state senate races last year, electing Annalisa Perea and Magdalena Gomez.
Mm-hmm.
So we're close to getting a solid progressive majority on that body. So the city councils, every city council in the county will be on the ballot. I believe even Clovis has to come to even year elections next year.
So, yeah.
I'm not 100% sure about that, but I know they have to do it by 2022. And so we want to start identifying candidates for those. Unlike the city of Fresno, the other cities do not have a primary followed by a general election. It's just the winner is determined in the fall election. School boards, we have 30+ school boards throughout the county. All of them will have part of their races, part of their seats on the ballot in the November election. And then special districts, I think we've got about 50 of those in the county, and all of them will have half of their seats on the ballot next year. So if you've ever had any interest in running or serving from office, you really want to look at these special districts. They're an excellent place to start. You can get elected to them with far less effort than a school board or a city council. You start to get a feel for the work that governance requires. So it's a good way in. And just to let, yes.
Can you tell us, for example, what is the special district that somebody could run for?
Yes.
Irrigation.
So there are irrigation districts, water districts, fire protection districts, parks and rec,
Right.
Dog catcher, stuff like that.
utility, not dog catcher. In some cases, cemetery, they don't call it cemetery, but that's what it is. I forget what they call it. And so there's a number of those. You can go onto the registrar's site and you can type in your address and it will show you what districts that you're in.
Right.
And just to give you an idea, so a few years ago I went and I saw I was in the Pinedale Public Utility District. Didn't know anything about it, so I did a little research and said, I'm going to run for this. So I filed, and the person who was going to be on the ballot that year, he had been on the body for 16 years.
Wow.
So, and nobody had ever run against him. So he didn't file because he would just wait and then get appointed by the Board of Supervisors because there wasn't a race. Well, that year I filed, he didn't file, so I was automatically elected. And,
I'm in that district, Pinedale
Yeah.
district. Yeah.
Nice.
but here's the thing, even if I had to run a race, there's fewer, at that time,
Yeah.
there were fewer than 1,000 registered voters in the district. It was an off year election. It was an odd year election. So maybe best case scenario, 150 people would have voted. So I could have won it with 75 to 80 votes. You know, I could definitely have met that many people in the time frame of the election. So, so these elections are a lot more, and there's a lot you can do. You know, we had a young woman, Sandra Celadon, who got elected to the Kiowa Parks and Rec District, and they had an issue there where the previous commissioners had sold the naming rights to the park to a beer company and were getting kickbacks. So Sandra organized a group to win 3 of the seats that were on the ballot, and she won all 3, and they were able to turn back the corruption. And out of that, she got a nice job at BAC.
Now, the boards and commissions in the county and so forth, Those are appointments, right? That's
Those are
why that's not up there.
Correct.
But I was going through your booklet at the office. There's an awful lot of positions open on
Yes.
boards and commissions. The only Democrat that's sitting on the Status of Women Commission is Gail Gaston. The rest are all Republican
Are they
on
men?
the Status
Yeah,
of
they're all
Women.
women, but they're appointed by the Board of Supervisors members.
Yeah.
So they're appointed, and she
But we
was
need to get
appointed
more
by Solomon
Democrats in
Farrow.
those boards and commissions. That's a good starting place.
Correct.
So, what can you do? The first thing is educate yourself.
Right.
As you can see, there's a lot of different things that happen during an election year that the average person really knows nothing about. So those of us who are a little more involved, we can learn about these things and we can share them with our neighbors. And if you feel comfortable doing so, you can present to groups like this. Because education is an absolute key, and particularly because of these changes we're going to have in the process next year.
We maybe teaming up with YouSpark to educate people on.
Yes, we're talking with them and with the Young Democrats about doing some promotional materials around the changes. Volunteer at the headquarters. We have a lot of activities going on there.
Well, tomorrow at noon, they're having something
Yes.
going on then, a voter turnout.
Tomorrow at noon, and then we're going to repeat it at 6. We're doing a volunteer orientation. And that we go through the various types of volunteer activities you can work on, both with the party and on campaigns. So again, that's at our headquarters. We're at 1033 U Street, right beside the Mediterranean restaurant.
I could be a receptionist.
The precinct leader. The precinct leader program is the most effective thing that we can do. And the idea here is that we have one or more people identified as a leader or a precinct captain, that's kind of the traditional name for it, who basically becomes the go-to person in a neighborhood for Democratic information. And so the idea is you would connect with your Democratic neighbors 2 or 3 times before an election.
Not
the
like
first-
block parties and stuff like that.
You can do that as well. The idea with the initial meeting is just to get to know them. Let them know who you are, what you're doing, nothing threatening, no ask other than you might want to ask them what their concerns are about their neighborhood. The second visit, you give them information. These are who our endorsed candidates are. This is our position on ballot measures. And then the third visit, or the third time you connect with them, would be the traditional get out the vote ask. One of the huge problems we have had historically is we spend a lot of effort registering people to vote. We spend a lot of effort
We don't follow
trying
up.
to convince them to vote when we get closer to election, but we don't communicate with them in between. And so I think that's one of the reasons we have such low voter turnout among traditionally among Democrats. So educating voters, absolutely critical, particularly on the new voting process. There's going to be confusion around that. People aren't going to know about it. It's imperative that you really talk that up. And then, of course, getting out the vote. We were very successful in that in 2018. Our get out the vote numbers were significantly higher than in equivalent midterm elections. We've got to carry that into 2020. We have to seriously drive turnout. And the Republicans are not going to go to sleep. They are going to be working aggressively. We're already seeing them with inroads into traditional Democratic communities, like they're selling messages in Latino communities, even in the LGBT community, these sort of false messages they create about various things. And they're very adept at it. Communications-wise, they're kicking our butt. And so we've got a lot of work to do, a lot of work ahead of us. And then, well, I talked a bit about the precinct leader program, but again, this I think is, if you are capable and willing, this is the thing that you could do that would have the most impact in terms of getting folks to.
What do we have, 60 precincts in the county?
No, it's into the hundreds.
In the
I don't know how many. So a little bit of upcoming activities. We mentioned earlier the volunteer orientation. We're doing that at the headquarters. There'll be one session at noon and one at 6. From August, we'll be doing it 2 days a month with the same schedule. And then we've also started these movie nights. The first one is this Thursday. We're showing Knock Down the House. It's about how AOC and 3 of the other new House members won their races by going against even the Democratic status quo, and were able to get themselves elected to Congress. And then on, I believe it's the July 23rd, we're showing the frontline episodes on the Mueller report. So that should be interesting as well.
I hear when Pat Brown did that, you had 60 people down at the office.
So we earlier, so he's referring to an informational session that we did on the Mueller report. Our next informational session is going to be on immigration and the Trump-inspired border crisis. It's probably going to be in early August. We don't have a date for that yet.
That'd be good.
We've previously done presentations on the general plan update. We had a presentation on the political landscape in Russia. We had a similar one on China and on the Middle East. So
We'll do one on
we're trying to create a situation where people can learn more about various timely topics. Then we're planning a mini convention in the August time frame. That's going to be 3 pieces. The first is kind of this educational piece about pretty much what we've talked about tonight. Part 2 is going to be feedback. We want to hear from the community what the issues are that you want us to be focusing on going into next year. And then the third part of it will be, okay, we know what the landscape is, we know what people want, how are we going to make it happen? So we'll be getting out more information on that. The precinct leader training, we'll be scheduling that within the next couple of weeks. We're also going to try and do 2 more specific trainings later in the year. One is a candidate training. We have some excellent modules that were provided to us from a program that the state party funded last year. So what we want to do is, once we start identifying candidates, particularly for those fall races next year, is to have them come to this multi-week candidate training where we break it down into fundraising, ground activity, communicating with the voter. I think there's about 10 different modules. And then the final one is Politics 101. And this, we're probably going to focus on rural areas with this, but the idea is to go into areas and talk about what a city council does, what a school board does, what the board of supervisors does, how those are separate from each other. Because a lot of people think they overlap. They think you can talk to your city council member and get a school issue addressed, and of course that doesn't work. And then also in the rural communities, there's a real disconnect between a problem like my water is undrinkable, and that any sort of government body can do something about that. So we need to create those connections for folks so that problems can be more effectively addressed. So that's kind of the idea with Politics 101. And then here's how you can reach us. As I said, we're downtown. We are open every day from 11 to 3, although there's usually somebody there from 9 to 5 and into the evening, most days when we're having meetings of some sort. So I hope this was helpful. Any questions?
I don't know why they keep pursuing this impeachment thing. And then I heard the other day, well, I mean, it's not going to pass in the U.S. Senate the way it is now. And somebody said, well, they can try him in the House of Representatives. But you don't try. That's not what their Constitution says.
Okay. You've given me a softball. I favor moving ahead with impeachment. I think it is criminal for us not to move ahead with impeachment. Because if we don't, we're condoning Donald Trump's illegal behavior.
Yeah.
And
So you oppose Pelosi's position?
absolutely. And yes, we may only get it through the House, but then the Senate has to be accountable when they're on the ballot next year. So if they don't want to go through with impeachment, let's make them stand election for it.
He has a question.
Yes.
Go ahead, Natasha. One more activity that goes on every month is registering, well, all the time, registering voters. There's always a need for volunteers to do that. Specifically, once a month, Marlon Dick runs the naturalization ceremony. It's 2 hours on a Tuesday generally to go in, register people who've just become citizens, and it's incredibly gratifying and it's really low-hanging fruit. Almost nobody ever wants to register as a Republican, given that you just became a citizen of a country where Trump's, telling you you're not welcome. So really, really important, and we're getting some outside assistance from various groups in August, but if you can possibly do it, please do let me know, or just call the Democratic Party headquarters and they'll tell you where you need to go and what you need to do. It's very, if you don't feel like being the person who fills out the forms, you can be the person who reviews the forms, you can be the person who just greets people and says, hey, welcome new citizen, please come over here. Lots of different things you can be doing. Every person who gets in there and assists with the registration, that's another registered voter who's likely to be on the Democratic side when it comes to voting.
You need
Even if they
Spanish.
register.
You need Spanish speakers.
We have Spanish speakers, we can always use more, we could use Farsi speakers,
Yeah.
we could use Hmong, connected registrars, all kinds, anyway.
And on the
Please,
calendar
please.
that the Democratic Party puts, it has it listed each month where it's going to be. If you just go to the calendar, it's already listed, so you
Convention
know
center,
exactly
yeah.
where it is
Yeah.
and what time it is. So are there any more questions to Michael? Michael, why can't we get rid of the
President?
Electoral College?
Well,
States.
that would require a constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
And it was a very good question. So, as all of you remember from your study of how the United States came together, we had a compromise to get the small states to participate in the formation of the country. And that was the U.S. Senate. So you have this very undemocratic body where you have, for example, 2 senators for Wyoming, which I believe has a population less than the city of Fresno, and with the same number of senators as California. So because we have this undemocratic institution in place, I don't see how we get to abolishing the Electoral College unless there's such an uproar from the people that we drive the politicians to do it. But we couldn't even drive them to pass the ERA, so I don't know how we get there.
You need 3/4 of the states in order to ratify it.
Sure, 38 states.
Yeah.
You need a lot
So,
less
are
of the
there any other-
interstate compact.
What's that?
Yes, Joan?
The interstate compact where like the states are signing on to award all of their electoral votes to whoever wins the nationwide political vote. That's the most realistic way that the electoral college could not be abolished but negated.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yes.
On this
Joe?
what is it, the 3rd of March, or whatever that date is, that the date that you start 11 days and then that's the ending date when you count the ballots then? Because I'm thinking the TV people have to have the time to where everybody shows up with their camera through one. So the 3rd, that's when it's all over and they count, right?
Yes.
Yes.
So the 3rd is the official election day, but there will be these earlier vote days prior to that.
11 days before that, but that
Yes.
will be when they finally count down to midnight and they count ballots. and
Yes.
have all the votes.
But the guideline for mail-in ballots is still in place. So if those ballots arrive, I believe it's within 3 days of the 3rd, they will still be counted.
As long as they were postmarked.
When is the application over with for the, applying for the redistricting for congressional districts?
So what Ray is talking about is the Independent Redistricting Commission for the state and
Right.
federal candidates. I believe that is open until early August. I forget the exact date. But they were recently at our central committee. If you're interested in serving on that body, please contact me and we'll get you more information. The way that is set up, there are 14 members. There are 5 Democrats, 5 Republicans, and 4 of anything else. And but in order to move anything forward, 3 Democrats, 3 Republicans, and 3 of the anything other have to agree. So
And they
that's
draw
a
up the
pretty
new
high bar.
congressional districts.
Yeah. Then you can apply. Like myself, I'm ineligible because I'm obviously a partisan person.
Yeah.
But if you have not been a candidate in a partisan office or a party member, but you have been active, you are eligible to serve, and I would encourage you to apply and do that. They do have an elimination round. There's a committee that looks and does that, and then I think the final numbers are chosen from at random from a pool.
I applied the last time, but they cut me out because there was
And-
about
And let me just add one more thing,
1,000
because there's an interesting bill in the legislature now to encourage counties to create their own independent redistricting commissions. And this is a hugely positive thing.
Oh, yeah.
Because right now, each elective body does their own redistricting, just as the state legislature used to for itself. So in the last cycle, Venancio Gaona, whom many of you may know, he and I attended the redistricting discussions for all of our local elected bodies. And there were some odd things that happened. Like the State Center Community College District, they did a little thumb just to protect an incumbent. So that incumbent could still win.
Wow.
Although that incumbent did eventually end up losing. But it wasn't because of where the district was. And the Fresno Unified School District, I think they used a third party to coordinate theirs, and theirs was extremely well done. But I think if there is a county independent commission that does it for all these bodies, that has the opportunity to be more transparent and more like what we've achieved at the state level. We do not have gerrymandering in California for state and federal offices.
So please join me in giving Michael a hand.
Thank you.
I have a few items listed as announcements of the activities that are coming up in the next month. Does anybody want to share anything that we don't already know or haven't talked about? Going, gone. Meeting adjourned. Sorry. You can anyway.
So, some of you know that